At 18, I watched my brother shove my 4 full scholarship college letters into the grill like they meant nothing. Then he laughed and said, "Our parents are done throwing money away on you. Go get a job and take care of yourself." My father made it worse. "We're putting our resources where they actually matter, into your brother. You were never as talented as he is." I left that same night with nothing. 15 years later, I stood under bright lights, holding a Nobel Prize in my hands. And now they're panicking, trying to reach me. 58 missed calls. 128 messages. But it was too late. Before I tell you about the absolute disaster that hit them, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I can still smell the charcoal. It is funny how memory works. You forget the sound of someone's voice over time. You forget the exact color of the wallpaper in your childhood bedroom. But smells? Smells lock themselves into your brain forever. For me, the smell of Kingsford charcoal and lighter fluid will always be the scent of my future burning. I was 18 years old. I had just walked up the driveway, my backpack slung over one shoulder, carrying a stack of mail I had grabbed from the box. Inside that stack were 4 thick envelopes. If you have ever applied to college, you know the difference between the thin rejection letter and the thick acceptance packet. I had 4 of them. Full-ride scholarships to 4 of the best pre-med programs in the country. I had spent 4 years sleeping 3 hours a night, studying until my eyes blurred, working weekend shifts at a hardware store just to pay for my own application fees because I knew my parents would never give me a dime. I walked around to the backyard to share the news. I thought maybe just this once they would be proud. Instead, I found my older brother, Carter, standing by the Weber grill. He had a beer in one hand and a pair of metal grill tongs in the other. My parents, Richard and Susan, were sitting at the patio table watching him. Carter saw the envelopes in my hand. He did not say a word. He just walked over, snatched the stack right out of my grip before I could react, and looked at the return addresses. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. "What is this, Matthew?" he asked, his voice dripping with that fake innocence he always used before he did something terrible. "More junk mail. Give those back," I said, reaching for them. Carter stepped back. He looked at my parents, then back at me. "Our parents are done throwing money away on you," he said. He tapped the envelopes against his chin. "Go get a job and take care of yourself." Then, he turned and tossed all 4 unopened envelopes straight onto the hot coals. I lunged forward, but the heat pushed me back. The edges of the paper curled instantly, turning brown, then black, before bursting into bright orange flames. I watched the seals of the universities, the proof of my sleepless nights, the ticket out of that town, disintegrate into ash. I whipped around to look at my parents. I expected shock. I expected my father to jump up and pull them out. I expected my mother to yell. They did nothing. My mother looked down at her hands, taking a slow sip of her iced tea. My father just looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "We are putting our resources where they actually matter," my father said, his voice flat and perfectly calm. "Into your brother. You were never as talented as he is. He needs the support to build his business. We are not wasting another second entertaining these little academic fantasies of yours." My own father. He watched my life burn and called it a fantasy. Carter had already drained the college fund my grandparents had set up for both of us, blowing it on failed startup ideas and expensive clothes. And now they were making sure I could not escape under my own power either. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying in that house was like bleeding in a shark tank. It only made them bite harder. I just stared at the ashes floating up into the evening sky, and in that exact moment, a switch flipped inside my chest. The desperate kid who wanted his parents' love died right there on the patio. Let us fast forward exactly 15 years. I was 33 years old, standing in a grand hall in Stockholm, Sweden. The lights were so bright they washed out the faces of the crowd. The applause was a physical force, vibrating through the floorboards. I looked down at my hands. I was holding a gold medal, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. I stepped off the stage, walking past royalty and the greatest scientific minds on the planet, and slipped into a quiet corridor to check my phone. The screen was completely lit up. 58 missed calls. 128 text messages. All of them from my father, my mother, and Carter. The same people who watched my scholarship letters turn to ash were now frantically trying to reach me. They were not calling to congratulate me. They were calling because their entire world was collapsing, and they thought they could use my name to save themselves. I stared at the notifications, a cold smile forming on my face. Took 15 years, but the fire had finally reached them. And I was not about to put it out. Let me take you back to that night, the night of the fire. After my father delivered his verdict, I did not say another word. I turned around and walked back inside the house. I could hear Carter laughing in the backyard, the clinking of glasses as they went right back to their evening. They thought they had broken me. They thought I would wake up the next morning, put on a uniform, and quietly start paying them rent while Carter played businessman. I walked up the stairs to my room. It was a small space, barely big enough for a twin bed and a desk, but it had been my sanctuary. I pulled an old, beat-up canvas duffel bag from the closet. I did not pack memories. I did not pack the trophies from middle school or the photo albums. I packed 3 pairs of jeans, 5 shirts, underwear, socks, and a heavy winter coat. I packed my toothbrush and my high school diploma. I reached under my mattress and pulled out a flat tin box. Inside was all the cash I had to my name. $38. That was it. My meager salary from the hardware store had mostly gone to paying for my own food and the application fees that were currently sitting as gray dust in the bottom of a Weber grill. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder. I looked around the room one last time. I felt a strange sense of numbness, a heavy anesthesia settling over my brain. I walked down the stairs, making sure to avoid the creaky step near the bottom. I went out the front door and closed it behind me with a soft, definitive click. I walked down the driveway. I did not look back. Not once. The night air was unusually cold for that time of year, biting through my thin jacket. I walked for 3 miles to the Greyhound bus station on the edge of town. The streets were empty, the streetlights buzzing with a low, electrical hum. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, but I kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking down. When I got to the station, it was mostly deserted. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting a sickly yellow glow over the scuffed linoleum floor. I walked up to the ticket counter. An older woman with tired eyes looked at me through the smudged plexiglass. "When is the next bus out of here?" I asked. "Where to, honey?" she replied, her voice rough from cigarettes. "Anywhere far," I said. "How far can $38 get me?" She typed something into her clunky computer. "I can get you a one-way to New York City. Leaves in an hour. But it will clean you out completely." "I will take it," I said, sliding the crumpled bills under the glass. I sat on a hard plastic bench, gripping my duffel bag against my chest. The station smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. For the next hour, I just watched the clock on the wall. Every tick of the second hand felt like a hammer hitting an anvil. I kept expecting the front doors of the station to burst open. I kept expecting my father to walk in, demanding I come home. I kept waiting for my mother to rush in, crying, realizing what they had done. But the doors stayed shut. Nobody came. They did not even bother to check my room. When the bus finally rolled into the parking lot, its air brakes hissing loudly in the quiet night, I stood up. I handed my ticket to the driver and climbed aboard. I found a seat near the back, pressing my forehead against the cold glass of the window. As the bus pulled out of the station and onto the highway, watching the lights of my hometown fade into the darkness, a profound realization hit me. I was completely, utterly alone. I had no money, no plan, no family, and no safety net. But as the miles stretched on, that terrifying emptiness slowly morphed into something else. Freedom. They had burned my letters, yes, but they had also burned the bridge. I owed them nothing anymore. I was a ghost to them, and they were dead to me. The Matthew who sought their approval was left behind in that house. The man riding this bus into the unknown was someone entirely different. I closed my eyes, the vibration of the engine humming through the floorboards, and for the first time in my life, I fell asleep without fearing what the morning would bring. New York City does not care about your sob story. When you step off a bus at Port Authority with nothing but a duffel bag and empty pockets, the city looks at you, chews you up, and spits you right back out if you are not ready to fight. I managed to find a cramped room in Queens. And when I say room, I mean a closet above a 24-hour laundromat. The floor constantly vibrated from the industrial washing machines below, and the air always smelled heavily of bleach and cheap fabric softener. My bed was a mattress on the floor that someone had left by a dumpster, and my kitchen was a single electric hot plate sitting on a milk crate. The window did not close all the way, so the freezing winter wind howled through the crack, forcing me to sleep in my heavy coat. I had to survive. That was the only goal. I took whatever jobs I could find that did not ask too many questions. My day started at 4:30 in the morning. I worked the opening shift as a barista at a coffee shop in Manhattan, dealing with Wall Street types who would scream at me if their lattes were not exactly 120 degrees. By 1 p.m., I stripped off my apron and ran to the subway to get to my second job, a customer service representative at a massive call center. For 6 hours, I wore a headset and let angry people yell in my ear about late fees on their credit cards. Then, at 8 p.m., I took another train out to a medical supply warehouse in Brooklyn. I spent the night shift hauling boxes of saline solution, surgical gloves, and heavy equipment. My hands were constantly blistered. My lower back felt like it was made of broken glass, and my feet were so swollen I had to unlace my boots just to walk home. I was making minimum wage across the board. Every Friday, I calculated my expenses down to the penny. My salary barely covered the extortionate rent for the vibrating room, my subway pass, and a diet consisting entirely of instant ramen and whatever stale pastries the coffee shop manager let me throw away at the end of my shift. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the mental torture. Every single spare minute I had, I spent at the public library. I used their computers, typing furiously, trying to piece my life back together. I did not have the physical acceptance letters anymore, and I did not have the login credentials for the university portals because they were printed on the papers Carter burned. I called the admissions offices of the 4 universities. I begged, pleaded. I explained my situation. I am sorry. The voice on the other end of the line at my top choice program told me. The deadline to accept the scholarship and submit your enrollment deposit was 2 weeks ago. When we didn't hear from you, the funds were reallocated to a waitlisted student. But my brother destroyed the mail, I argued, my voice cracking, standing at a payphone in the freezing rain. I can send you my high school transcripts again. I can prove who I am. Mr. Johnson, I sympathize with your family situation, but without the signed intent to enroll by the deadline, there is nothing we can do. The cohort is full. You will have to reapply next year for general admission, and the full-ride scholarship is no longer guaranteed. Click. The dial tone sounded like a flat line. I called the second school, the third, the fourth. The answers were all variations of the same bureaucratic wall. Deadlines are deadlines. Rules are rules. The world does not stop spinning just because your family decided to sabotage you. I remember walking back to my room in Queens that night. The sleet was coming down hard, soaking right through my thin jacket. I was so tired I was hallucinating shadows in the corners of my vision. I walked past a bank window and caught my reflection in the glass. I was dangerously thin. I had dark, purple bags under my eyes. I looked like a stray dog. I thought about Carter. I imagined him sleeping in his warm bed in his spacious room, probably planning his next weekend trip with my parents' money. He had stolen my future, and he was facing 0 consequences. He was going to inherit the house, the cars, whatever was left of the legacy. I was standing in the freezing rain in Queens with $5 in my pocket. A dark, heavy bitterness settled into my bones that night. It was a cold anger, the kind that does not explode, but just burns quietly, consuming everything it touches. I realized that nobody was coming to save me. The universe was not going to balance the scales just because I was a good kid who got a bad deal. If I wanted a life, I was going to have to rip it out of the concrete with my bare hands. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning at the coffee shop. I was running on exactly 2 hours of sleep. The espresso machine was hissing, the line was out the door, and the noise was deafening. A man in an expensive wool overcoat stepped up to the counter. He ordered a complicated, overly specific drink. I punched it in, but in my exhaustion, I missed a modification. When I handed him the cup, he took one sip, scowled, and slammed it back down on the counter. The lid popped off, and hot coffee splashed all over my apron, my shirt, and my bare arms. I said, "Oat milk, you idiot," he barked, not even apologizing as the scalding liquid burned my skin. I stood there, dripping with coffee. The entire shop went silent. My manager rushed over, instantly apologizing to the man, offering him a free pastry, and glaring at me. "Go clean yourself up, Matthew," the manager hissed. "One more mistake like this and you are done." I walked into the cramped employee bathroom and locked the door. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, my apron stained dark brown. I gripped the edges of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. A lump formed in my throat, thick and suffocating. The sheer unfairness of it all crashed down on me. I was brilliant. I was supposed to be sitting in a pre-med lecture hall, not getting coffee thrown at me by an arrogant stranger while fighting for minimum wage. I finished my shift in total silence. When I finally dragged myself back to my room above the laundromat that night, I dropped my bag on the floor. I opened the side pocket to get my phone charger, and a piece of paper fluttered out. It was a photograph. The only photograph I had accidentally packed when I fled. It was taken a few years ago at Christmas. My father, my mother, Carter, and me. We were all smiling. We looked like a normal, happy family. I picked it up. I stared at Carter's smug face. I stared at my father's hand resting proudly on Carter's shoulder. I walked over to the electric hot plate. I turned it on high. The metal coil slowly glowed bright orange. I grabbed a cheap frying pan I had found at a thrift store and set it on the coil. I held the photograph by the corner and lowered it into the hot pan. I watched the edges curl. I watched the plastic coating bubble and melt. I watched the fire catch, eating away at my father's face. Then my mother's, then Carter's. The smoke filled the tiny room, smelling toxic and sharp. Watching that photo burn felt like a funeral. Not a funeral for them, but a funeral for the desperate hope that I would ever have a real family. When it was nothing but a pile of black ash in the pan, I ran it under the sink and washed it down the drain. It was over. The past was dead. The next morning, I was wiping down the counters at the coffee shop when Elijah walked in for his shift. Elijah was a man in his late 40s, a massive guy with a graying beard and eyes that had seen too much. He was the shift supervisor and he usually kept to himself. But he had seen the coffee incident the day before. He poured 2 cups of black drip coffee, slid one over to me, and leaned against the counter. "You look like you are carrying a ghost on your back, kid," Elijah said, his voice a deep rumble. I normally brushed people off, but something about the exhaustion made my defenses crumble. I told him, not everything, but enough. I told him about the scholarships, the fire, the escape, and the brutal rejections from the universities. Elijah listened without interrupting. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "I get it," he said quietly. 10 years ago, I went through a divorce that ripped me in half. My ex-wife had a great lawyer. She took the house, the savings, and the worst part was the custody battle. I lost my kids because I couldn't afford a place with an extra bedroom. I spent 3 years drinking myself to death in a basement apartment. He looked me dead in the eye. "You are stuck on the injustice of it, Matthew," he said. "You keep contacting these schools telling them your sad story, hoping they will take pity on you. The world doesn't reward victims. It respects survivors. Stop writing them letters asking for sympathy. You need to write a survivor's manifesto. You need to show them that what happened didn't break you. It sharpened you." That conversation changed the trajectory of my life. Elijah was right. I had been playing the role of the traumatized kid. I needed to become the man who was undeniably too good to ignore. I stopped sleeping. Or rather, I redefined what sleep meant. Sleep became a series of 20-minute naps taken on the subway or leaning against a stack of cardboard boxes in the medical warehouse. Elijah became my unofficial strategist. He let me use the coffee shop's back office computer after hours. I stopped calling the universities that had rejected me. That door was closed. I needed a new door, even if I had to kick it off its hinges. I started researching non-traditional pathways into medical science. I found a bridge program. It was a rigorous, highly competitive online pre-medical science track run by a prestigious university. It was designed for professionals looking to transition into medicine, and it was notoriously difficult to get into. The tuition was steep, but they offered a handful of full-need scholarships for exceptional candidates. I applied. But this time, my personal essay was not about a boy whose brother burned his mail. It was an analytical, cold-blooded breakdown of how extreme adversity cultivates extreme resilience. I wrote about the biochemistry of stress using my own life as the case study. I wrote about how managing inventory in a medical warehouse while functioning on minimal sleep demonstrated a capacity for high-pressure performance that no high school AP class could ever teach. I submitted the application and went back to the grind. Weeks turned into months. Winter thawed into a brutal, humid New York summer. The heat in the laundromat room was suffocating. I kept working my 3 jobs. The physical toll was severe. I dropped 15 pounds I could not afford to lose. My hands shook from caffeine and adrenaline. There were days I stood on the subway platform, looking down at the tracks, and felt a dangerous, pulling sensation. The weight of the struggle was crushing me. But every time I felt weak, I pictured Carter. I pictured him driving around our hometown, arrogant and comfortable. I pictured my father telling me I was a bad investment. That rage was the fuel that kept my heart beating. It was mid-October. The city was just starting to turn cold again. I had just finished my shift at the warehouse and was riding the rattling G train back to Queens. The car was empty except for a guy sleeping in the corner. I pulled my cracked, second-hand smartphone out of my pocket. It was 2:13 a.m. I had a new email notification. The sender was the admissions committee of the bridge program. My thumb hovered over the screen. This was it. If this was a rejection, I did not know how much longer my body could hold out. I clicked open the message. The screen was cracked right down the middle, distorting the text, but I could read the bold letters at the top. Dear Mr. Johnson, congratulations. I stopped breathing. I read the next line. We are thrilled to offer you admission into the Advanced Pre-Medical Sciences cohort. Furthermore, the committee was deeply moved by the tenacity demonstrated in your application. We are pleased to award you the Dean's Merit Fellowship, covering full tuition and providing a living stipend for the duration of your studies. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I read it again and again. Full tuition. A living stipend. It meant I could quit the call center. It meant I could quit the warehouse. It meant I could finally actually study. I did not cheer. I did not jump up and down. I sat on the hard plastic seat of the subway train, buried my face in my blistered hands, and wept silently. I cried for the 18-year-old boy who had lost everything in a fire. But more importantly, I cried because I finally understood something profound. No one had swooped in to save me. My family had buried me alive, and I had clawed my way out of the dirt with my own bleeding fingernails. I had rescued myself. The next morning, I walked into the coffee shop and handed my apron to the manager. I walked over to Elijah, who was wiping down the espresso machine. I pulled up the email on my phone and set it on the counter. Elijah read it. A slow, massive grin spread across his face. He wiped his hands on a towel and pulled me into a bear hug that nearly cracked my ribs. I told you, kid. He laughed, his voice booming. Survivors. I moved out of the room above the laundromat a week later. I rented a small, quiet studio in Brooklyn with the first month's stipend. It was nothing fancy, but it had a desk, a window that closed properly, and it was quiet. I sat down at that desk, opened my newly issued university laptop, and prepared to go to war. The survival phase was over. The building phase had begun. The bridge program was brutal by design. It was meant to weed out anyone who was not absolutely obsessed with the science. For me, it felt like oxygen. After years of hauling boxes and taking verbal abuse from customers, memorizing organic chemistry pathways and cellular biology structures was a privilege. Because I did not have a social life, a family to visit on holidays, or any distractions, I threw myself into the coursework with a terrifying intensity. I was absorbing information at a rate that started to alarm my professors. I was not just memorizing the textbook. I was analyzing it, finding flaws in old research, and asking questions during virtual seminars that the instructors had to take time to research before answering. That is how I caught the attention of Dr. Elaine Mercer. Dr. Mercer was a legend in the department. She was a brilliant immunologist, tough as nails, and infamous for failing students who did not meet her impossible standards. She did not suffer fools, and she had zero patience for excuses. During my second semester, we were assigned a massive research paper on autoimmune responses. Most students summarized existing literature. I spent 3 straight weeks locked in my apartment, analyzing raw datasets from a recent, highly controversial clinical trial. I proposed a completely new theoretical pathway for how certain immune cells misfire and attack healthy tissue. I submitted the paper. A week later, I got a message from Dr. Mercer ordering me to come to her physical office on the main campus. I walked into her office, a room overflowing with journals and medical models. She was sitting behind her desk, holding my printed paper. It was covered in red ink. My stomach dropped. I thought I had failed. She looked up at me over her glasses. "Matthew," she said sharply. "Sit." I sat on the edge of the chair. She tossed the paper onto the desk. "Who helped you write this?" "Nobody, Dr. Mercer," I replied, confused. "I researched it myself." She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto mine. "This hypothesis about the macrophage signaling loop, it is highly irregular. It contradicts 2 major papers published last year." "I know," I said, my heart pounding. "But if you look at the raw data from the trial, the control group exhibited a secondary inflammatory response that those papers dismissed as an anomaly." "I don't think it was an anomaly. I think it is the primary trigger." Dr. Mercer stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute. The silence was thick. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth twitched upwards. "You think like a researcher, Matthew," she said softly. "Not just a student. You have the instincts of a scientist. You see the gaps in the wall that everyone else walks right past." Hearing those words from a woman of her stature, it was indescribable. For 18 years, my father had told me I was useless. Carter had convinced the world I was the slow, talentless brother. And here was one of the brightest minds in medicine telling me I had a gift. It was the first time the deep, festering wound in my chest felt like it was finally starting to heal. "I am nominating you for the university's internal research grant," Dr. Mercer continued, opening a file. "It is a fully funded position in my laboratory. You will be running real trials based on this hypothesis. If you succeed, we publish. If you fail, you learn. Are you ready for that?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. Entering Dr. Mercer's lab was like stepping into a different universe. I traded my coffee-stained apron for a white coat. I learned how to run flow cytometry, how to culture cells, how to extract RNA. I practically lived in the lab. My hypothesis was sound. The initial tests were showing incredible results. The science was working. I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. I felt untouchable. But I had forgotten a crucial rule about my family. They always show up when you finally have something worth destroying. The university proudly posted an announcement on their public social media pages about the grant recipients. It included a short profile on me, mentioning my unconventional path to medical research and praising my dedication. It was meant to be an inspiring story for alumni. 2 days after it was posted, my phone buzzed with an alert. Someone had tagged me in the comments section. I opened the app. There, under the photo of me in my lab coat, was a comment from an account I recognized instantly. It was Carter. "Unconventional path?" That's a polite way of saying he's a college dropout who couldn't handle real school the first time around. Don't glamorize failure. Our family tried to help him, but some people just refuse to work hard. I stared at the screen. The blood drained from my face. My hands started to shake. A violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled the phone against my desk. In a matter of hours, other people, strangers, alumni, probably people Carter had directed there, started replying to his comment. They were laughing. They were calling the university's standards into question. They were mocking the sob story narrative. Wait, so they gave a massive grant to a barista who didn't even finish a normal undergrad degree? One comment read, "Sounds like a PR stunt by the university. What a joke," read another. I felt the air being sucked out of the room. It did not matter that I was a grown man in a prestigious laboratory. In that moment, I was 18 years old again, standing in the backyard, watching my future turn to ash while Carter smirked. He had found me. Across state lines, across years of silence, he had sniffed out my success and thrown a match on it. The panic was absolute. I locked the door to the lab. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. I thought about the board of directors seeing those comments. I thought about the grant being revoked. The shame was a physical weight, pressing me into the floor. The ghost of my past had reached out from the grave and grabbed me by the throat. I immediately drafted an email to the university communications office, asking them to delete the post. Then, I drafted an email to Dr. Mercer, telling her I needed to withdraw from the grant program for personal reasons. I was going to run. It was a trauma response, pure and simple. Hide before they can hurt you worse. Before I could hit send, there was a sharp knock on the lab door. "Matthew, unlock the door," a stern voice demanded. It was Dr. Mercer. I wiped my face, took a shaky breath, and opened the door. She marched in, holding a tablet. The screen displayed the comment section of the post. "Did you see this?" she asked. I looked at the floor. "Yes, I am sorry, Dr. Mercer. I was just typing an email to you. I am going to step down. I don't want to bring negative attention to the lab or your reputation." Dr. Mercer slammed the tablet down on a steel workbench. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I flinched. "Sit down," she commanded. I sat on a stool. She stood over me, her expression a mix of fury and intense focus. "Matthew, look at me," she said. I forced my eyes up to meet hers. "Is what this idiot wrote true? Did you drop out because you were lazy?" "No," I whispered. "Did you fail because you lacked the intellect?" "No." "Then why the hell are you letting a man who clearly feels threatened by your shadow dictate your career?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I don't care about Facebook comments. The board doesn't care about trolls. We care about data. We care about results." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. If you run now, you prove him right. You give him the power to write your biography. Your job is not to hide, Matthew. Your job is to make your work so undeniably brilliant, so absolutely foundational to this field, that petty little men like this become nothing more than footnotes in your history. You crush them with excellence. Do you understand me?" I stared at her. The panic slowly began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She was right. I had spent years building a fortress of knowledge, and I was about to hand over the keys because Carter threw a pebble at the window. "I understand," I said, my voice steadying. "Good," she snapped, picking up her tablet. I had the communications team block his IP address and delete the defamatory comments. Now get back to work. We have a cell culture to review. That day marked the final death of my fear. Carter had tried his worst weapon, public humiliation, and I had survived it. I realized then that his attacks were not signs of power. They were signs of desperation. He was watching me rise, and it was driving him insane. I threw myself into the research with a vengeance. Over the next 2 years, I practically lived in the laboratory. Our hypothesis proved correct. We discovered a mechanism that could predict autoimmune flare-ups weeks before symptoms appeared. It was groundbreaking. I published my first paper as a lead author, then a second, My name started appearing in major medical journals. I was invited to speak at smaller symposiums. I was no longer the kid from Queens. I was Dr. Matthew Johnson, a rising star in the world of immunology. I had built my armor out of science, and it was impenetrable. While I was building a legacy based on verifiable data and grueling hours in the lab, Carter was building a house of cards. Because I had severed all direct contact, I only knew what was happening with my family through the occasional Google search. A morbid curiosity I indulged maybe once a year. The contrast between our lives was staggering. My father had made his choice. He had invested his resources into the golden child. And the golden child was bleeding him dry. Carter had always been a master of appearances. He was the guy who bought the expensive suit before he had the job interview. He had bounced from one failed business venture to another. First, it was a tech startup that went bankrupt in 6 months. Then, it was a boutique marketing firm that lost its only 2 clients. Through it all, my parents footed the bill. The crowning jewel of his absurdity was the car. I remember seeing a photo he posted online. Carter, leaning against a brand new, metallic black Porsche 911. He was wearing a designer watch and a tailored blazer, smiling like he had just conquered Wall Street. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Next stop, changing the healthcare industry." I found out later, through public property records, that my parents had taken out a massive second mortgage on their house to buy that car and inject cash into his newest company. They were draining their retirement accounts, leveraging their inheritance, risking their entire financial future to maintain the illusion that Carter was a success. His new venture was a public relations and wellness consulting firm. It was essentially a shell company. He used buzzwords, flashy websites, and aggressive networking to attract small-time investors. But here is where his jealousy turned into a fatal error. Carter knew he had no substance. He knew he was failing. And he knew, because my name was becoming prominent in academic circles, that his little brother was succeeding. So he did what a parasite does best. He tried to attach himself to a host. I started getting strange emails from investors I had never met, asking about my partnership with Carter's firm. I dug into it. I discovered that Carter was using my name in his pitch decks. He was not forging my signature. He was too cowardly for outright fraud at that point, but he was heavily implying a professional connection. He called his firm a family-driven healthcare initiative. He subtly suggested that the brilliant Dr. Matthew Johnson was the scientific brain behind his wellness products. He was using my hard-earned credibility to scam people out of their money to pay for his Porsche. I sat in my office, looking at the promotional materials a confused investor had forwarded me. It was nauseating. After throwing my college letters into a fire and telling me to get lost, he was now trying to ride my coattails to save his sinking ship. I could have sent a cease and desist letter right then. I could have called my parents and screamed at them, but I didn't. Science teaches you patience. You do not intervene in a reaction too early, or you ruin the result. You observe. You gather data. You wait for the perfect moment to introduce the catalyst. Carter was a bloated tick, full of stolen blood, walking blindly toward a cliff. I realized that warning him would only make him change direction. If I wanted to truly protect my name and ensure he could never use me again, I had to let him step off the edge. I hired a corporate attorney, a brilliant, ruthless woman named Chloe. I handed her all the emails, the pitch decks, and the evidence of his implied association. "What do you want to do, Matthew?" Chloe asked, looking over the documents in her sleek Manhattan office. "We can shut this down today. A swift legal notice will terrify him." "No," I said, looking out the window at the city skyline. "If we hit him now, he plays the victim. He tells my parents I am bullying him. He spins it. I want you to build an ironclad file. Document every lie, every misrepresentation, every time he uses my name to secure capital. Track the money. Track the investors." Chloe raised an eyebrow, a predatory smile forming on her lips. "You want to build a guillotine. I want to build a vault," I corrected her. A vault of truth so heavy that when I finally drop it on him, he can never crawl out from under it. So I waited. I went back to my lab. I continued my research. I let Carter drive his Porsche. I let my parents believe their investment was paying off. I let them live in their delusion while I quietly, meticulously, prepared for the day the bill would come due. That day was approaching faster than any of us realized. And the stage was set for Boston. 5 years had passed since I started my research. I was now 32. The data we had gathered in Dr. Mercer's lab was no longer just a theory. It was a proven, peer-reviewed model that was changing how hospitals approached early-stage autoimmune disease. Because of this, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at the Global Immunology Summit in Boston. This was not a small gathering. This was the Super Bowl of medical research. Thousands of the top doctors, pharmaceutical executives, and venture capitalists in the world would be in that auditorium. It was the moment my career would transition from promising researcher to industry leader. A week before the conference, I was sitting in my office reviewing my slides when my direct line rang. "Dr. Johnson," a nervous female voice said. "My name is Sarah. You don't know me, but I used to be the executive assistant for your brother, Carter." I sat up straight. "Used to be. I quit yesterday," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "He is erratic. He hasn't paid his staff in 2 months, and he is dodging calls from his main investors. But that isn't why I am calling." "Go on," I said, turning on the call recorder on my phone. "Carter knows you are speaking at the Boston Summit. He is terrified. His biggest investor, a medical tech firm, is going to be there. He told them that you two are launching a joint venture, and he promised them you would announce it during your keynote." I let out a harsh laugh. "He promised them what?" "He has been using a fake email address pretending to be your manager," Sarah confessed. "He forged an agreement saying you are bringing your patents over to his company. Matthew, he is flying to Boston. He is planning to ambush you at the conference, force a public photo op, and trap you into acknowledging him in front of the press to validate his lies. If you deny him, he has a PR team ready to flood the conference hashtag with rumors that you stole the research from his company." The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He was cornered, drowning in debt, and his survival strategy was to hold my reputation hostage in front of the entire scientific community. "Why are you telling me this, Sarah?" I asked. "Because he fired me when I refused to doctor a financial statement," she said bitterly. "And because he is a fraud. I sent a secure file to your email. It has everything. The forged emails, the investor pitch decks, the fake contracts. Do what you want with it." She hung up. I opened my email. The file was there. It was a goldmine of federal crimes. Wire fraud, forgery, identity theft. I did not panic. I did not feel the crushing anxiety I had felt years ago when he commented on my university post. I felt a cold, absolute calm. The pieces were finally in place. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Chloe. "Chloe, it is time," I said. "He crossed the line from misrepresentation to felony fraud. I am sending you a file." Half an hour later, Chloe called me back. She sounded breathless. "Matthew, this is a bloodbath. If we hand this to the SEC or the FBI, he goes to federal prison. His investors will sue him into the Stone Age. Draft the cease and desist. Draft the public disavowal." I ordered. "I want it stamped, notarized, and legally airtight. Have copies ready." "Are we filing the lawsuit today?" she asked. "No," I replied, staring at my presentation slides on the monitor. "If we do it quietly with lawyers, he spins it to our parents as a misunderstanding. He plays the victim. He needs to be stopped publicly, in an arena where his PR spin means absolutely nothing." "You want to do it at the Boston Summit," Chloe realized. "I am going to let him walk right into his own trap," I said. I spent the next 3 days refining my presentation. I made sure the science was flawless. I anticipated every hostile question. I practiced my delivery until my voice was raw. I was not just preparing a medical lecture. I was preparing for a public execution. I packed my bags for Boston. I packed a tailored suit that cost more than I used to make in a month at the coffee shop. I packed the flash drive with my presentation. And, in a secure folder in my briefcase, I packed the notarized legal documents Chloe had prepared. Carter thought he was going to ambush a scared kid. He didn't realize the kid was dead, and he was walking into the crosshairs of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The atmosphere at the Boston summit was electric. The massive convention center was buzzing with thousands of professionals. Cameras flashed, reporters conducted interviews in the lobby, and the stakes could not have been higher. I stood backstage, listening to the hum of the crowd. I adjusted my tie. My heart was beating steadily. I felt no fear. 10 minutes before I was scheduled to go on, the conference organizer rushed backstage, looking frantic. "Dr. Johnson," she said, "there is a situation. A man named Carter Johnson is at the press entrance. He is causing a scene, claiming he is your business partner and demanding VIP access to the stage for a joint announcement." I smiled. Tight, predatory smile. "Let him in," I said. "Put him in the front row, and make sure the cameras have a clear view of him." The organizer looked confused but nodded and hurried away. I walked out onto the stage. The applause washed over me. The auditorium was massive, a sea of faces stretching back into the darkness. I stepped up to the podium and looked down at the front row. There he was, Carter. He was wearing a flashy suit, his hair slicked back. He looked older, tired, the stress of his failing lies etching deep lines into his face. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up, a desperate, fake smile plastered on his face. He actually thought this was going to work. He thought I would be too intimidated by the crowd to cause a scene, that I would just play along to avoid a scandal. I ignored him. I began my presentation. For 45 minutes, I commanded the room. I walked them through the data, the failures, the breakthroughs. I spoke with absolute authority. I could see the heavyweights in the audience nodding in agreement. I could see the pharmaceutical executives whispering to each other, taking notes. I was dominating the space, and I could see the panic rising in Carter's eyes. He realized, perhaps for the first time, the massive gulf between us. He was a con artist playing dress-up. I was the real deal. As I wrapped up the scientific portion, the floor opened for Q&A. A prominent researcher named Nathan, known for being ruthlessly skeptical, stood up at the microphone. "Dr. Johnson, your data is compelling. However, there are rumors circulating online this morning, reportedly from your own PR team, that this model was heavily derived from proprietary algorithms developed by an external wellness startup. Care to clarify?" The room went dead silent. Carter had pulled the trigger on his smear campaign. He shifted in his seat, looking incredibly smug. I leaned into the microphone. "I am glad you asked that, Nathan." I clicked the remote in my hand. The massive screen behind me transitioned from complex medical charts to a stark, black background. For images appeared on the screen. They were not medical diagrams. They were high-resolution scans of 4 receipts. The receipts from the public library where I had paid to print the recovery forms for my scholarships. The dates were clearly visible, 15 years ago. "There is a rumor that my success is a family-driven initiative," I said, my voice echoing through the silent hall. "Let me be entirely transparent about my origins." I looked directly down at Carter. His smug expression vanished, replaced by sheer terror. 15 years ago, my brother, who is sitting in the front row today, threw my 4 full-ride medical scholarship letters into a charcoal grill and burned them, I said. The audience gasped. A collective shock rippled through the thousands of professionals. He did this with the full support of my parents, who told me I was a waste of resources. I was left homeless with $38 to my name. I clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared. It was a screenshot of the forged email Carter had sent to the investors, alongside the legal cease and desist order bearing Chloe's law firm seal. "The man in the front row is currently under investigation for wire fraud. He has forged my signature and used my name to scam investors to fund his lifestyle. I have no business partner. I have no PR team. And I certainly have no family. The cameras swiveled immediately, pointing directly at Carter. The flashes erupted like a strobe light. I built this research from the ashes of the future he tried to destroy, I concluded, my voice ringing with finality. Some forms of destruction do not end a life. They define the direction of it. Thank you. The silence held for 1 second, 2 seconds. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was a roaring, standing ovation. The entire auditorium rose to their feet. I looked down. Carter was trying to cover his face from the cameras, stumbling over the chairs as he desperately tried to flee the auditorium. Security guards were already moving toward him. The storm had broken, and I was the only one left standing. The fallout from the Boston conference was absolute. Within 48 hours, the medical tech firm that Carter had been courting pulled their funding entirely. 2 other angel investors filed civil lawsuits. Carter's wellness startup, which was essentially a house of cards built on my name and a fake promotion he had given himself to CEO, completely collapsed. I went back to my lab in New York. I shut out the noise. I had a team of brilliant researchers depending on me, and we were on the verge of finalizing a predictive model that would change autoimmune treatment globally. A year passed. I was 33 years old. It was a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting in my office, drinking a terrible cup of break-room coffee and reviewing a grant proposal, when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed an international number. Sweden. I answered it. Dr. Johnson speaking. Dr. Matthew Johnson. A voice with a thick European accent said, "Please hold for the Secretary General of the Nobel Assembly at the Karolinska Institute." My blood ran cold. I stopped breathing. You hear rumors in the scientific community. You know when your work is being evaluated, but you never actually believe the call is going to come. A new voice came on the line. Dr. Johnson, it is my great privilege to inform you that you have been jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for your discoveries concerning the predictive mechanisms of autoimmune response. I do not remember the rest of the conversation. I remember gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles cracked. I remember hanging up the phone, standing up, and walking out into the main laboratory. My entire team was looking at me. "We got it," I whispered. The lab erupted. People were screaming, crying, hugging each other. It was the pinnacle of human achievement in our field. It was immortality. Within an hour, the news hit the global press. My face was on the front page of every major news outlet. The kid who was told he was a waste of resources was now a Nobel laureate. And right on cue, my phone started to vibrate. It started with a text message from an unknown number. "Matthew, it's Dad. We saw the news. We are so incredibly proud of you. Please call me immediately. It's an emergency." Then came another text. Then a voicemail. Then my mother started calling. By the end of the day, I had 58 missed calls and 128 messages from my family. They were not calling to congratulate me. They were calling because the walls were closing in on them. Carter was drowning in legal fees. His investors had discovered the truth, and the federal authorities were breathing down his neck. My parents had leveraged their entire inheritance, their house, and their retirement accounts to bail him out of his previous failures. And now the bank was threatening to foreclose on their home. They were completely destitute, and suddenly their discarded son was the most famous scientist on the planet. They saw my Nobel Prize as a life raft. They thought they could use my newfound global status to legitimize themselves, to convince the banks and the courts that the family was still a solid investment. I listened to one voicemail from my father. "Matthew, please pick up." His voice pleaded, sounding frantic and breathless. "Carter made some mistakes, but we are family. The press is hounding us. If you just make a public statement saying you support your brother, the investors will back off. We can fix this. Call me." I deleted the voicemail. I blocked the number. I felt a surge of absolute disgust. Even now, with the highest honor in science attached to my name, they only saw me as a tool to save the golden child. I did not respond. I packed my bags for Stockholm. I was going to accept my prize, and I was going to do it alone. The Nobel Week in Stockholm is a surreal experience. You are treated like royalty. There are lectures, banquets, and endless press conferences. But the highlight of the week, aside from the ceremony itself, is the formal donor reception. It is an exclusive gala filled with billionaires, heads of state, and the most influential figures in global philanthropy. I walked into the Grand Hall of the Grand Hotel. The room was dripping with crystal chandeliers. The tables were covered in white silk, and a string quartet was playing softly in the corner. I was wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, talking to a Swedish diplomat about funding for a new research institute. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a commotion near the entrance. The security guards were trying to hold back 3 people. I turned my head. It was my father, my mother, and Carter. I still have no idea how they managed to get into the hotel, let alone past the outer security perimeter. They must have spent the last of their borrowed money to fly to Sweden, hoping to ambush me in a place where I could not easily escape. My father spotted me. He pushed past a waiter, adjusting his cheap suit, and marched directly toward me. My mother followed close behind, looking terrified, clutching her purse. Carter trailed them, looking pale and sick, entirely stripped of his usual arrogance. The diplomat I was speaking with noticed my expression change. "Dr. Johnson, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Excuse me for a moment." I stepped away from the crowd and intercepted my family near a massive floral arrangement. "Matthew," my father gasped, trying to pull me into a hug. I put my hand up, pressing it flat against his chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. "Do not touch me." His face flushed red. "Matthew, keep your voice down. People are looking." "Let them look," I said coldly. "What are you doing here?" My mother started to cry, her tears ruining her makeup. "We came to support you, sweetie. You're receiving the Nobel Prize. We're your family. We should be together." "You came to save yourselves?" I corrected her, staring right through her fake tears. "Your house is in foreclosure. Carter is facing a federal indictment. You didn't fly across the ocean to celebrate me. You flew here to use me as a human shield." Carter finally stepped forward. He looked pathetic. The designer clothes could not hide the fear sweating out of his pores. "Matt, please. The SEC is threatening to freeze my accounts. If we just take one photo together, if you just tell the press that my company consulted for your lab, the investors will drop the lawsuits. I'll pay you whatever you want. Just give me your endorsement." I looked at my brother, the man who had laughed while my scholarship letters turned to ash. The man who told me to go get a job because I was worthless. Now he was begging for scraps from my table. "You want my endorsement?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Yes," Carter pleaded, his eyes wide with desperation. "Just one photo. We issue a joint press release. It solves everything." "Okay," I said smoothly. I gestured toward the center of the room, where several major international journalists and high-net-worth investors were gathered. "Let's go talk to the press." My father's face lit up with relief. He actually thought I had caved. He thought the pressure of the public setting had forced me to submit to the family hierarchy, just like it always did when I was a kid. He was wrong. I was not leading them to salvation. I was leading them to the slaughterhouse. I walked straight toward the largest cluster of journalists and elite donors. My family followed right behind me, their chests puffed out, ready to play the role of the proud, supportive relatives. As we approached, the reporters recognized me. The cameras immediately turned our way. The flashes began to pop. The low murmur of the gala quieted down as people realized the newest Nobel laureate was about to make an impromptu statement. I stopped in front of the cameras. I turned and looked at my lawyer, Chloe, who had been standing near the bar watching the entire interaction. I gave her a single, sharp nod. Chloe walked over smoothly. She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of crisp, thick legal documents bearing the seal of her Manhattan law firm. "Dr. Johnson," a reporter from a major financial network called out, "are these your family members?" Will they be joining your new research initiative? I looked directly into the camera lens. No, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent hall. The people standing behind me are Richard, Susan, and Carter Johnson. I have not spoken to them in 15 years. I heard my mother let out a sharp gasp. My father froze, the fake smile melting off his face. Recently, I continued, projecting my voice so every billionaire, every diplomat, and every investor in the room could hear me. Carter Johnson has been telling private equity firms that his wellness startup is partnered with my laboratory. He has used my name to secure millions of dollars in capital. I took one of the legal folders from Chloe and held it up. This is a formal, notarized public disavowal, I stated. I have zero affiliation with Carter Johnson or his company. Furthermore, the documents in this folder contain proof that Carter Johnson forged my signature on multiple investment prospectuses. Copies of these files have already been handed over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the federal authorities. The room erupted. The journalists started shouting questions. The flashes were blinding. Matthew, stop! My father hissed, grabbing my arm, his fingers digging into my tuxedo jacket. You are ruining us. I yanked my arm away with such force that he stumbled backward. You ruined yourselves, I said, turning to face him fully. 15 years ago, you stood by a grill and watched this man burn 4 full-ride medical scholarships because you decided I was a bad investment. You told me to go get a job. Well, I got a job, and I am doing it exceptionally well. I turned my attention to Carter, who was physically shaking, his face the color of wet chalk. You wanted public attention, Carter? I asked softly, stepping closer to him. You got it. This room is filled with the people you've been trying to scam. Take a good look around. Your run is over. The elite crowd surrounding us physically took a step back from my family, as if they were suddenly contagious. The disgust on the faces of the donors and diplomats was palpable. In the world of high finance and global science, reputation is everything. And I had just publicly branded Carter a radioactive fraud. The hotel security, realizing the situation had escalated, quickly moved in. Sir, you need to leave, the head of security said, grabbing Carter by the elbow. He's my brother, Carter yelled, struggling against the guard. Tell them, Matt. Tell them we're family. I don't have a brother, I said, turning my back to him. I watched over my shoulder as security dragged Carter, my father, and my crying mother out of the grand hall. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them. Felt exactly like a funeral. Not a funeral for a person, but the absolute final burial of their power over me. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. After the gala, I returned to my suite at the Grand Hotel. The room was enormous, silent, and incredibly still. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the freezing, dark waters of the Stockholm harbor. My phone was sitting on the mahogany desk. It was vibrating constantly, a relentless buzzing sound that filled the quiet room. The news of the confrontation had already leaked to the press. Financial blogs were picking up the story of the Nobel laureate exposing his fraudster brother. The texts from Carter went from angry, arrogant demands to absolute, pathetic begging in the span of an hour. You ruined my life. How could you do this to your own blood? Matt, please. The bank just called. They're freezing the corporate accounts. I'm gonna go to jail. Please call your lawyer off. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I did not read them all. I did not need to. I walked over to the phone, held down the power button, and watched the screen go black. The vibrating finally stopped. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, sat down in a heavy leather armchair, and closed my eyes. I expected to feel a rush of adrenaline. I expected to feel the hot, fiery triumph of revenge. But I didn't. What I felt was a profound, overwhelming sense of exhaustion washing out of my muscles. It was the feeling you get when you finally set down a massive weight you have been carrying on your shoulders for a decade and a half. I was free. The ghost of the 18-year-old boy who stood in the backyard smelling lighter fluid was finally at peace. He did not need their validation anymore. He did not need their apologies. He had built an empire of facts, data, and undeniable truth, and the liars had shattered the moment they crashed into it. I slept for 10 hours that night. It was the deepest, most dreamless sleep I had experienced since the night I left my hometown on that Greyhound bus. When I woke up the next morning, the Swedish sun was shining brightly, reflecting off the water. I put on a fresh suit, drank my coffee, and went downstairs to formally accept my Nobel Prize. I stood on the stage. The King of Sweden handed me the gold medal, and I smiled. It was a genuine smile. My mind was completely clear. The storm was over, but the wreckage left behind in America was vast, and there was one final piece of administrative cleanup I had to handle before I could permanently close the book on the Johnson family. A month after the Nobel ceremony, I was back in New York. I received a formal request from a court-appointed mediator. My parents and Carter were requesting a sit-down meeting. They claimed they wanted closure and to formally apologize without the press involved. I knew it was a lie. They didn't want closure. They wanted mercy. But I agreed to the meeting, mostly because Chloe, my lawyer, advised me that getting them to sign a sweeping non-disclosure and non-interference agreement would legally immunize me from any future harassment. We met in the massive glass conference room at Chloe's law firm. When my family walked in, I barely recognized them. The stress of the last 30 days had aged my father 10 years. His posture, once so rigid and commanding, was completely stooped. My mother looked frail, clutching a cheap tissue. And Carter looked like a ghost. He had lost weight, his eyes were bloodshot, and he wore a faded sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. They sat on the opposite side of the long mahogany table. Chloe sat next to me, her legal pad open, looking at them like a shark looking at chum. My father cleared his throat. "Matthew, thank you for agreeing to see us. Let's cut to the chase," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You are here because the federal prosecutors are offering Carter a plea deal, and you want me to write a letter of leniency to the judge. And you want me to co-sign a loan to save your house from foreclosure." My father's jaw dropped. He looked at Chloe, then back at me. "How did you?" "I have excellent lawyers," I said flatly. "The answer to both requests is absolutely not." My mother broke down sobbing. "Matthew, please, we are going to be on the street. Your father and I. The stress is destroying us. We're talking about divorce. We have nothing left. We spent every dime we had on Carter's business." I looked at my mother. I felt no pity, only a clinical curiosity. "Why?" I asked. I never understood it. Even before the fire, I had straight A's. I worked night shifts. I was independent. Carter drained his college fund, wrecked 3 cars, and failed out of his first semester. Why did you back him and throw me away? My father stared at the polished wood table. He looked small, defeated. Because you didn't need us? My father whispered, the truth finally breaking out of him. You were always so smart, so self-sufficient. Carter needed us. Investing in him, buying him that Porsche, funding his companies. It made us feel powerful. It made us feel like the head of the family. We knew if you became a doctor on your own, you would leave us behind and never look back. We wanted a son who owed us. So we made sure he owed us everything. The silence in the room was absolute. Twist. There it was. The ugly, foundational truth of our family dynamic. They didn't favor Carter because he was better. They favored him because he was weak, and his weakness fed their egos. They burned my future not just out of spite, but out of a desperate need to keep me beneath them, to ensure I would be just as dependent on their conditional love as Carter was. It was the most pathetic thing I had ever heard. I looked at Carter. You heard him? You weren't the golden child, Carter. You were the pet. And they fed you until you burst. Carter put his head down on the table and started to cry silently. I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. Chloe slid 3 thick folders across the table. These are waivers, I said. They state that you accept full responsibility for your financial ruin, that I hold no liability, and that you will never contact me, my laboratory, or my associates ever again. Sign them, or Chloe will file a civil suit for defamation and emotional distress that will strip you of whatever pennies you have left. My father picked up the pen with trembling hands. He signed the paper. My mother signed. Carter signed without even reading it. Good, I said. This is the last time you will ever see my face. I walked out of the conference room. I did not look back. The next 2 years were a period of massive expansion for me. Using the Nobel Prize money and securing heavily vetted private grants, I opened my own independent research facility in upstate New York. We focused purely on decoding immune system anomalies. It was a sanctuary for real science, far away from corporate PR and political posturing. One of my first hires as the director of campus operations was Elijah. Elijah, the man who had pulled me out of my depression at the coffee shop in Queens. He had been managing a small logistics company, but I offered him a salary that tripled his income, with full benefits and a housing allowance. Because of that salary and his stable, prestigious new job, Elijah was finally able to go back to family court. He hired a fantastic lawyer, fought the custody battle he had lost years ago, and won joint custody of his 2 daughters. Seeing him walk around the institute campus, smiling, holding his kids' hands on the weekends, it was a better feeling than standing on the stage in Stockholm. It was proof that when you build power the right way, you can use it to genuinely heal people. Meanwhile, justice was finally serving its cold dish to Carter. The federal prosecutors did not offer him a lenient plea deal. Without my endorsement, and with the mountain of evidence Chloe had handed over, the SEC made an example out of him. Carter Johnson was convicted of 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. I read the news article online while drinking my morning coffee. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The article included a photo of the feds raiding his office. In the background, being loaded onto a flatbed tow truck by the repo men, was the metallic black Porsche 911. The symbol of his fake empire, bought with my parents' stolen retirement, towed away to an impound lot to be auctioned off for scrap value. My parents' fate was equally grim, though far less public. Without Carter's fake income to float their massive debts, the bank officially foreclosed on their house. The 4-bedroom suburban home with the big backyard and the Weber grill on the patio, the house where my future was burned, was auctioned off to a young couple. My parents lost their inheritance. They lost their savings. The stress of the financial ruin finally fractured their marriage, leading to a bitter, drawn-out divorce where they fought over the remaining scraps of debt. My father moved into a cheap motel, finding work as a greeter at a big-box hardware store. My mother rented a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town, living off Social Security. They had sacrificed the son who could have saved them, all to worship the son who destroyed them. It was a tragedy entirely of their own making. Boundaries are only effective if you enforce them ruthlessly. A piece of paper signed in a lawyer's office means nothing if you still leave the door cracked open in your heart. 6 months after Carter went to federal prison, the receptionist at my research institute knocked on my office door. She was holding a crinkled, pale blue envelope. "Dr. Johnson, this arrived in the mail today," she said, looking hesitant. It bypassed the standard screening. It says personal and urgent on the front. I took the envelope. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my mother's cursive, shaky and uneven, but unmistakably hers. The return address was listed as an apartment complex in a low-income neighborhood a few towns over from where I grew up. I held the envelope in my hand. I could feel the weight of it. It was thick, probably several pages of apologies, excuses, and ultimately, a plea for money. She was probably struggling to pay rent. She probably thought that enough time had passed, that my anger had cooled, and that the good son inside me would surface and write her a check out of guilt. She thought the bond of blood would override the memory of the fire. I looked at the trash can next to my desk. I could just throw it away. I could shred it. But I realized that destroying it quietly would leave her waiting. She would check her mailbox every day, hoping for a reply, hoping she still had a hook in me. I needed to send a message so absolute, so definitive, that she would never buy another stamp with my name on it. I walked out of my office and went down the hall to the administrative wing. I walked up to the mailroom clerk. "Do you have the red ink stamp?" I asked. The clerk blinked, surprised. "The official one?" "Yes, doctor." "Stamp this," I said, sliding the unopened blue envelope across the counter. The clerk picked up the heavy rubber stamp, pressed it into the red ink pad, and slammed it down hard across the front of my mother's letter, right over her desperate, shaky handwriting. "Return to sender. No longer at this address. Put it in the outgoing bin," I instructed. I walked back to my office. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I didn't wonder what the letter said. I knew that by sending it back unopened, with that stark red ink across the front, I was giving her the final answer she needed to hear. I was not her son anymore. I was not her safety net. I was the man she had thrown away, and I was never coming back. That red stamp was the padlock on the vault. The parasites were permanently severed from the host. Another year went by. My life fell into a beautiful, predictable rhythm of science, mentorship, and quiet evenings. The noise of my past had completely faded into the background. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a package arrived at the institute. It was a long, rectangular box wrapped in plain brown paper. There was no return address, just my name typed on a shipping label. I took it into my office and cut the tape with a letter opener. Inside, packed securely in bubble wrap, was a single object. It was a metal grill tong. It was old, the handles worn, but the metal had been scrubbed clean. It gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of my office. There was no note attached, no explanation. I stared at it for a very long time. Was it from Carter, sent from the prison mailroom as some twisted, passive-aggressive reminder? Was it from my father, a silent surrender, acknowledging the exact weapon they had used to try and destroy me? Or was it just a bizarre coincidence? A piece of junk accidentally shipped to the wrong address? It didn't matter. I picked up the cold metal tongs. 15 years ago, watching these exact tongs push my college acceptance letters into the fire had nearly killed me. It had filled me with a terror and a sadness so deep I thought I would drown in it. Now I just felt nothing. It was just a piece of cheap metal. It had no power over me. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, tossed the tongs inside, and shut it. I didn't throw them away, and I didn't display them. I just filed them away in the dark, exactly where the memory of my family belonged. I walked over to the window of my office. Below me, on the campus green, dozens of young researchers in white coats were walking between laboratories. They were bright, ambitious, and unburdened. They were the future, and I had built the place where that future was safe. People often think of revenge as a loud, explosive thing. They think it requires screaming matches, physical violence, or actively tearing someone else's life apart. They are wrong. The most devastating, absolute revenge you can exact upon people who try to destroy you is to survive them. It is to take the bricks they throw at you and build a fortress they can never enter. It is to cultivate a life so rich, so successful, and so profoundly peaceful that their absence is the greatest gift they could have ever given you. They burned 4 pieces of paper. They thought they were burning my life, but all they really did was light the torch that guided me to exactly who I was meant to be. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, from that backyard grill all the way to Stockholm, but I wanted to share the whole truth with you. I hope this resonated with you in some way. We all have people in our lives who try to define our worth, who try to tell us we aren't good enough or that we don't deserve the opportunities we've earned. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved because they were holding you back or trying to tear you down? Let me know your experiences in the comments. I read them, And I promise you, you are not alone. If you made it all the way to the very end of this video, you belong to a special group. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the letter W. That stands for winner. That is our secret code for the 1% Club. The people who understand that survival is a choice and that success is the best revenge. Please hit that like button if this story meant something to you, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can share more stories, more struggles, and more victories together. Stay strong, keep building your fortress, and I will see you in the next one.